couple more minutes to see if some people are joining us a little bit late, and then we will get started. Thank you. Be right with you shortly. Very much, Elena. It's a pleasure to talk to you all today. It's a pleasure to work with Education USA once again. So to get us all started here, let me introduce you to some of my colleagues who are also with us today. With us today are Professor Penny Hammrich from Drexel School of Education and Professor David Goldberg from our Department of Physics. Professor Dandekar was unable to join us today as he got called away to a Smart Cities conference. That said, all of us are heavily involved with our doctoral programs. I've been involved with doctoral programs for, almost 20 years now, and I spend a lot of time advising undergraduates and other graduate students at the master's level on applying to doctoral programs. And my colleagues have much the same sort of background. So that said, please do use the chat function to ask us questions at any point in time along the way. Professors Goldberg and Professor Hammrich will answer those questions as they come up. We'll also have a more open Q&A session at the end. And so before I launch into it, one thing that would be very helpful for all of you listening and all of you who have joined us today is if you would just type into the chat, like, what academic areas are you interested in pursuing if you're thinking about a doctoral program? Are you interested in engineering? Are you interested in business? Are you interested in the natural sciences, social sciences? It would just help us to address your questions more directly and tailor our presentation to what might be helpful to you. So please do use the chat function. Let us know what you're interested in. And with that, away we go. All right. So just an overview of what we're talking about today. In terms of doing a PhD program, I'm going to talk a little about why do a PhD. A PhD is not for everybody. So we want to talk about what it really means. We'll talk about some different types of degrees and how a doctoral program compares with other degrees. We'll talk about the expected career paths after you get your PhD. What is it that a PhD trains you for? Then we'll get into, like, so what sort of application should you be putting together? What should you expect? What will help your application? And we'll talk a little bit about, being an international student at a U.S. higher educational institution. And then, of course, we'll get to questions and answers at the end. All right. Okay. So the quote you see before you, I know hopefully everybody can read this, but let me read it to you because it's actually very, very important to understand this. Completing a PhD is a long, hard road with many potholes and washed out bridges along the way. You may run over some landmines and have to stop and turn around and explore other routes. If the goal is important enough to you, then these obstacles will not prevent you from completing your journey. This is from someone with a PhD in computer science, actually. And this quote kind of summarizes a lot of what goes on in a PhD program. PhD program's quite challenging. It's very difficult. It's very different from what you might experience as an undergraduate student. It's very different from what you would experience as a master's student because part of what you're attempting to do is advance knowledge, which means you're doing something that hasn't been done before. You're asking a new question, or you're answering an old question in a new way. So it's quite different from just sitting in a classroom and listening. So if you're considering doing a PhD, you need to know why. Like, what is your motivation for doing a PhD? First and foremost, you should be passionate about research. That is what a PhD is all about, training you to do high quality, independent research that advances knowledge in one way or another. No matter what field you're in, that's what these degrees are all about. If you're the sort of person who loves school, loves being in the academic environment, discussing ideas, toying with concepts, staying up late at night over coffee or beer or vodka or whatever it is, and just talking through concepts and ideas, well, then maybe a PhD is for you. if you're interested in pursuing a career like this in educational settings, some professional areas, some areas of society or government, where the research skills are what you're bringing to bear in terms of your career, that's where a PhD would make some sense. And first and foremost, this isn't true across all fields, but for the most part, if you pursue a PhD, the primary job goal, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, is to make you a professor yourself at another institution. We're looking for people who want a career in academia to continue creating new knowledge and working in the areas that we're all interested in. So to give you a little bit of information, actually there's a lot of information hopefully up there on the screen. To compare a PhD with some of the other degrees, there's a lot of things that go on. If you go actually to the bottom of that table, one of the things about a PhD is that the preparation, work experience is nice, but it's really not a requirement for most of our fields. For some fields it might be. We will take, in the United States, people straight into PhD programs out of a bachelor's degree if they're ready. A master's is good to have, of course. Whereas professional degrees, professional masters or a professional doctorate, things like an MBA or an EDD, are degrees where work experience is expected and more or less required before you go into that. A master's program in general really kind of directs you into two areas. It's either sort of depth in a specific area for moving back into industry or government work, or an MS or an MA degree to be a stepping stone to get you into a PhD program. Maybe you are changing the field you're interested in doing research in, or maybe your undergraduate didn't prepare you as well enough to get ready for a PhD program, so you pursue a master's degree of some form. This again, so I forgot this slide was here, but it's basically saying the same thing. The PhD is really about advancing your research skills and scientific discovery. The master's skill is that master's program is kind of that bridge in between the undergraduate and the PhD. It's not necessary to do a master's before a PhD in the United States. One usually gets a master's along the way towards a PhD, but not always. It's quite variable, and wherever you're applying, you should look up what their expectations are. Okay. So what does a PhD actually prepare you for? Again, first and foremost, it's research. It's all about doing research. The idea is to put you on a path, on a career path, such that you will become a thought leader in your chosen field. You'll be publishing, hopefully, some academic papers, really advancing knowledge, and whether you're in political science or psychology or physics or education or whatever field you're in. But in addition to doing research, I mean, one of the things that obviously you do as an academic is you become an educator. So you share your knowledge with students at various levels. We also wind up in many instances being educators to society more broadly. They may not be students necessarily in the classroom, but we'll be asked to speak at or discuss things that we're working on with the private sector, with industries, sometimes with the government. Most PhDs, the goal is to go into academia, whether that's doing research and teaching, but other career opportunities that become open, government jobs in particular, become open to PhDs. There are a lot of industry jobs that are open specifically for people with the kind of research skills that a PhD would bring to bear. And a lot of non-governmental organizations. So in my own areas, places like the IMF and the World Bank, they hire PhDs quite extensively. And then, of course, there's consulting work where, again, it's those high-level research skills that are in very, very, very high demand. Okay. A brief overview of what you can expect in a PhD program. PhD programs, in general, take on average somewhere between 4 to 6 years. Again, that typically includes the master's along the way, but depends upon the specific field. It depends upon the program. Normally in a PhD program, one does about 1 to 2 years worth worth of coursework first, during which or after which there may be some kind of qualifying exam where you're being asked to show, have you demonstrated sufficient mastery of the knowledge in order to move on to the research phase. And typically the research phase is called the PhD candidacy level. You become a PhD candidate once you have completed all your coursework and passed the qualifying exam. As you're going through the program, you may be asked to be a teaching assistant. You may be asked to be a research assistant. And you'll be working as you go through it closely with a faculty advisor or a group of faculty working on a particular research project. These are, how you devise your own research project that goes into becoming your dissertation. The dissertation proposal comes at varying times depending upon what field you're in. Typically, I would say you would want to be doing that somewhere in your third year, where basically what you're doing is you're demonstrating you have the research skills required, and you're proposing what your dissertation will look like. You do that before your faculty, typically your colleagues who are also PhD students, and the faculty will then decide whether you're on a good research path towards completing a high-quality dissertation or not. By the time you get to the end of your program, 4th, 5th, 6th year, hopefully not much longer, you will defend your dissertation. Having completed your dissertation, you will again get up before your faculty, present your proposal, explain what your research has been and what you found in your research, and the faculty will determine whether you have qualified to earn the PhD letters behind your name. All right. Now, along the way throughout all of this, again, the focus is on research. That's what we're here for. But there's other professional development opportunities that take place throughout a PhD program. One of them is speaking, seminar, presentation skills. Research is a collaborative exercise. You work with others constantly, whether they're on your research team or others in your field who are interested in very similar topics that you are. So one of the things you need to learn you develop as you're going along with your PhD program is presenting in seminars. Often you will be presenting before your own faculty and your fellow PhD students, but as your research develops, you'll be sent out to academic conferences to present before faculty and other PhD students, all throughout the world. Some universities offer support for that. Here at Drexel, we offer, at least in the business college, we offer fairly substantial support. I believe some of the other schools here also offer support. Various universities offer some don't offer any, but that's something to check. You will also be trained on getting grants and funding for your research. Again, that varies by field. In my fields, that's not very common. But in the engineering fields, it's very much expected that you will be applying for grants on a regular basis, and you will learn how to do that from working with your faculty. Other things you will learn how to do. So all this research that we publish, it's refereed. That means it's peer reviewed. And as faculty members, we're often sent papers to review to sort of determine whether it's high enough quality to be published in this journal. And we involve our graduate students quite extensively in that process. We'll give them the papers to review on their own, sort of practice in becoming, an independent researcher, like what's good about this paper, what's not so good about this paper. You will also have opportunities for teaching in most programs. Here at Drexel, it varies a lot across the colleges. In the business college, for example, we ask our students to teach independently at least 3 or 4 times before they graduate. The idea is that they will have a teaching portfolio before they leave with their PhD, and that gives them an edge on the job market when they're looking for an academic position. And, as you're working as a teaching assistant, you will interact with undergraduates, you will interact with master's students, and you'll have opportunities to be a mentor to the younger generation, and helping them get excited about the fields that you're excited about. This is usually one of the more popular slides and topics, financial aid for PhD programs. I am happy to report that compared to undergraduate or master's programs, for PhD programs, there's usually a lot more financial aid available for these types of programs. And let me explain to you why that is. In a PhD program, as I've said maybe 10 times already, it's about training to do research. And that's research work with your faculty. Our goal when you come into our PhD programs is to make you our colleague. When you come in, you're a student. You're still learning. But by the time you leave, you should be our colleague. And we will send you out to some other academic institution where you're going to be a co-author with us for a long time. You're going to be part of our research network. So when you're here and you're working with us as a research assistant, you know, that's very valuable to us. We want help. We want bright minds with us at all times working on research together. We want people who are really excited and interested in the stuff that we do. You know, I do, for example, economic growth of nations. I want students to come and work with me who are also excited about that topic in particular. So because we're looking for people like this, we're hiring you, in a sense, to be our apprentice. So therefore, in PhD programs, universities who make their name on research, you know, there's a big value in having high quality PhD students. So many universities offer at least some form of support. Here at Drexel University, most of our programs have full support in one way or another. Full support means full tuition scholarship. There'll be some kind of scholarship available, which means you're not paying tuition. There will also be a stipend that you're provided with so that you can, you know, pay your rent, eat food, and, you know, get through life. So you don't have to worry about getting any kind of other job. And in addition, it may also mean things like covering your health insurance, or conference travel support may be available, or other fellowships may also be available, okay? Some programs, some other universities might give you partial support, where they'll give you the tuition but not the stipend, or the other way around. They'll give you a stipend but not the tuition. Other programs work in a way where maybe for the first year there is no support, and you have to kind of prove it to the faculty that you're worth investing in. So after the first year, you will get support. So as you're looking at your applications, as you're considering where to apply, these are the sorts of questions you want to be asking up front, so you know what you're getting yourself into, okay? Okay. So let's turn to applications. I mentioned that a little bit. Let's talk to the idea of, like, how many applications should you send out? Where should you send applications? So here are some of the things you should be looking for. The most important one, it goes back to the discussion we just had about, you know, bringing you in to be our apprentice. The most important thing is fit, research fit. You want to be applying to institutions where there's faculty members doing research in exactly the area you want to be trained in. So you should look at rankings, you should look at accreditation. Those things matter. But the most important thing is finding a group of faculty who are doing research in the area that you actually want to be trained in. So let me give you, again, an example from my own area in economics. At Drexel, we're very strong in particular areas of economics. We're particularly strong in macroeconomics, industrial organization, international trade, and applied micro. But we don't really have anybody here doing environmental economics. So we could get an outstanding application, top scores, great GPA, came from an excellent undergraduate institution, you know, maybe they came from Harvard. But if they're interested in doing something that we're not doing, we won't accept them. Somebody wants to do environmental economics, they could be great researchers, but they're not going to fit with us. They would be happier somewhere else. So when you're looking at PhD applications and figuring out where to apply, spend some time on universities' websites. Look at their faculty. Look where they're publishing. Look what they're publishing. Use Google Scholar. If you have keywords or ideas or things that you're really interested in, I saw people were talking about maybe cognitive behavioral psychology, political science, or engineering, or whatever it is you're interested in, find those people, find where they are, and find a group of them. If you find just one professor at a particular university you want to work with, be careful of that. You need a full committee. You need a team of people really working in the area you're interested in. Okay. Once you've found schools that you're interested in, go to the school's websites. They all have some kind of information, email address where you can ask for more info, or a place on their website where you can enter your contact info, and they will send you more information. Get their specific information. All right. Other things you should be doing, attend webinars like you're doing now, online information sessions from the universities themselves. Use the Education USA advising offices. We've had many, many years of experience working with them. They are fantastic for international students as a resource for information and advice, particularly when it comes to dealing with visa issues. So, how many applications should you send out? My advice, and people may differ on this, 5 to 10, maybe up to 12 different applications in places where you have a research fit. It should be a range of rankings of institutions, right? You should take a shot at maybe a top level institution, but everybody wants to get into the Harvard universities of the world. Harvard University's business school, just to give you an idea, receives about 1,500 applications every year. They take only about 10 students. So it's very, very selective. And really, you're going to be happy where you find the right research match. Again, pay more attention to that than rankings. One other thing you should consider is the size of the program. There's a trade-off between big and small. Big programs with lots of PhD students may be a little bit easier to get into. You'll certainly have more PhD colleagues to work with in your research. But large programs may be very difficult in the following sense. Some large programs have a high attrition rate, high failure rate, where students do not get through, sometimes because there's a lack of funding for all those students. The other challenge with the big program is that it can be harder to get the advisor you want. If you're competing with 20 other students and you're all interested in the same work, you may not be able to get to work with the big dog, the top advisor in that particular field. Okay? Common things that go into a PhD application pretty much anywhere you would apply to in the United States. Almost every program requires some form of standardized exam. A GRE is the most common. For a lot of business programs, it's the GMAT. There are a few others. Please, whatever you do, go to the university, find out what's required, and be prepared to take those. And I often advise that people plan to take them 2 times. The first time, things can go wrong. You just didn't have a good day. Give yourself enough time to get your scores up. Those scores matter a lot. Not so much in if you get a really high score, whether you're going to get in or not. That doesn't really matter so much. But really bad scores can get you eliminated very, very quickly. If you are not a native English speaker, you will often be required to have some kind of English test. The TOEFL and the IELTS are the most common. A lot of universities will waive that requirement if you have a degree from an recognized English-speaking university. Your statement of purpose. This is a very, very important document. Please put a lot of time into this. Please have help writing it. What you want to convey in your statement of purpose is what your motivation is for doing a PhD. Why are you interested in this particular field? What research ideas get you excited? This is your opportunity to tell us who you are and why you're a good fit for our programs. One little tip here. I've seen this in a lot of statements of purpose that I've read. They talk about how great Drexel is and how wonderful our university is and how brilliant they think our faculty are, and that's why it would be such an honor to be here. We know that already. You know, the faculty we already think we're great. Don't tell us about us. Tell us about you. Who are you? Why are you a good fit to come work with us on our research teams? That's what we want to know. You will need 2 or 3 letters of recommendation. I strongly recommend that you get letters from people who hold PhDs, because they will be in the best position to evaluate your skills relative to what it takes to successfully complete a PhD program and be a top-notch researcher. We will need your transcripts. In some universities, more and more universities do not require the official transcripts right away. You can just upload an unofficial transcript, but eventually you will need to get us your official transcript at some point in time. Sometimes that doesn't happen until after you've been admitted. Do you need a master's degree first? As I said before, no. Do you need work experience? No, not necessarily. Work experience relative to a PhD, let me put it this way, is very good if your work experience motivates or helps you shape what your research project or your research interests are. Okay. Things that will help you get admitted, what are the standards? If you have any research experience at all in your background, whether that's work, undergraduate, master's, please highlight that. Please make sure that is on your CV, your resume. Please make sure to mention it in your statement of purpose. That is a big, big, big plus. Do well on the GREs and the GMATs. Study for them. They matter. You want to have good grade point averages from your undergraduate and your master's. If you happen to have somewhere in your background, I've had plenty of people apply who maybe in their undergraduate had one really bad year with some bad grades. I strongly recommend that you spend time in your statement of purpose addressing it. Talk about it. What happened then that you weren't such a good student? And we've seen plenty of people who just had a bad year. They got distracted. Other things were going on in their life. Personal issues came up, and they just didn't have the time to put into school the way they would have liked to. And there's an explanation for it. But if it looks like you had a bad year and you don't address it, it kind of looks like you're trying to hide something. I suggest you address it right away. As you go through the application, as you write that statement of purpose again, why are you pursuing this degree? What's your motivation? From the very beginning of my talk, I talked about a PhD is a very difficult degree to get. It's very different from many other types of degrees. And we want to see how motivated you are. We want to know you're really passionate about these ideas, these concepts, pursuing this knowledge. We want to see that. Other things to do. So I realized that as international students, visiting the universities you might be interested in is difficult and possibly even prohibitively expensive. We fully understand that. This is where you use the web, you reach out via email to, again, use the website for their information. I do not recommend you reach out directly to faculty, at least in our fields. Go through the proper channels, because sometimes you can email a faculty member and it can hurt you more than help you. If you can visit the universities you're interested in, that's great. If you happen to be in North America, please don't hesitate to reach out to the universities you might be considering going to see if you can have a chance to visit, do a campus tour, talk to maybe a program manager, and you may even get an opportunity to talk to some of the faculty or current PhD students. Okay. One of the other things that will come up, whether it's after you've sent the application or on these visits, is a possibility for an interview. These are really important. Often when we go through the applications, at least for us in the business college, we'll get down to a list of maybe 20, 25 people for maybe 3 slots. And we'll interview them all, whether it's via Skype or coming to campus. Those interviews really matter, because that's really how we decide who we want on our research team. So if you do get an interview, whether it's during the application time or after they've gotten your application, do your homework. Be prepared for that. All right. let me talk just a little bit about being an international student, a little bit about the visas. There's typically two types of visas you could be on. F1 is the standard. F1 is when we are sponsoring you, and it allows you to come here and stay and study, but it doesn't allow you to work off campus. The J1 visa is the type of visa you would get if you have some kind of external funding. Usually it's a funding from a private foundation in your home country, or you may be a funding from a government. If you happen to have external funding like that, be sure that is clear in your application, because that will often mean that if somebody else is paying for you, that means that we might be able to find an extra position for you since it costs us less. Make sure you highlight that. It's no guarantee you're going to get in, but it certainly gives us something to think about on this end. With visa questions, I am definitely going to defer to the experts in Education USA. This is something they're very, very good at helping international students get into the United States to pursue higher education degrees. So please use their website. Please see their advisors for any advice you need on that process. And that really brings me to the end of the talk. I'm losing my voice already, but we'd like to open it up for questions and answers. I see the chat's been going quite a bit. So please, what else can we tell you about pursuing a PhD in the US? Are there any topics I missed that you wanted to hear about? Are there any particular fields you'd like to ask about? And while we're doing that, let me put up some website information. If you're interested in Drexel University in particular, you get to be a dragon while you're here. That's one of our, that's our mascot. We love our dragons. But here are some websites you can go to get more information about our own particular PhD programs. And we'd certainly be very, very happy to hear from you and answer any questions. In fact, I'm going to type in my personal email address here at work. So if you think of any questions afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions. Let me also ask if my colleagues, Professors Goldberg or Professor Hammrich, would like to jump in and say anything. No further questions? I made everything crystal clear.
Actually, I have a question. Can I ask?
Sure.
Students usually ask about publications. It is recommended to have publications prior to the application process. Are there any requirements where they have to be published?
That's an excellent question. At least in the fields that I'm familiar with, no. In fact, it would be kind of surprising if they did have a publication. I think there's a few where having publications is a little bit more expected and very helpful. Psychology often tends to be one. People tend to do a lot of research lab work in the psychology fields, but again, it's not necessary for the most part. Research experience is a big help. So if you have your name on a publication in a science or engineering or psychology, it's definitely a plus.
Mm-hmm.
I see a question from Daria. Is it necessary to have previous teaching experience? And I believe Professor Hammrich can answer that question. If you're particularly interested in the education area, I would suspect that it's probably very helpful. In the other areas, no. It is not a requirement at all that you have teaching experience. In fact, here's another tip on your application. One of the mistakes we see people make is they will write their statement of purpose about how they really want to be a teacher at a college. They really want to just work with students and teach and teach and teach and teach. And yes, that is for many of us a big motivating factor. I love teaching my students. I thoroughly enjoy interacting and working with them. But doing the PhD is about research. You can have maybe one or two sentences about how you would like to teach, but your focus needs to be on research. If you overemphasize teaching, that can hurt your application. We want people who are coming in here to do research, not people who are coming in here to be trained to be teachers. In fact, there's some programs out there where you may never get an opportunity during the PhD program to teach. So if you're interested in teaching, if that's part of your motivation, look carefully at the programs you're applying to see what kind of opportunities you might get to do that. But I do emphasize, don't spend a lot of time with your statement overemphasizing it.
All right, one more question, can I ask?
Sure.
It's about how to contact professors. You mentioned that you do not think it's a good idea to contact professors first, but then in many other sources of information I read that they require to contact professors. Even on the application form, they have a question, have you contacted our professors? What would you recommend?
This is one of those that really varies by field, which makes it more complicated. In our fields, in the fields where you're really doing a lot of coursework early on and your research project may not be very clear up front, I do not recommend contacting professors. That applies to business, that applies to economics and some of the other social sciences, because your research isn't really going to take shape until sometime in your second, third year, and your actual advisor who will be your mentor really isn't determined until much later. Whereas other fields where you're immediately jumping onto a research project, I think this is more common in the engineering fields. It's more common that you would reach out to specific faculty about their research needs and who they need to work with. What I do recommend is if the program has organized their website properly, look at what the website recommends you do for contacting them. Most of our programs, all of our programs have some kind of program manager. That is a staff person whose job is to interact with, PhD students, but also potential applicants. And they, if you contact them first and ask their advice specifically, like, should I contact faculty or which faculty should I contact? I'm interested in this area. They can direct you. The emails out of the blue that we get from students, the reason I advise you to be careful with that is you can actually, if you say the wrong things or express interest in the wrong type of research area, some faculty members will be very dismissive and they may decide you're out. We're not going to accept your application. So I would just be cautious with that. And again, use the university's various websites and information to figure out whether you should contact faculty directly.
Thank you.
Any other questions I can answer? If you type them into the chat, I can answer them that way. Maybe if Professor Hammrich or Professor Goldberg want to chime in on that question about contacting faculty.
Chris, this is Dr. Hammrich. I did chime in on that. In the School of Education at Drexel, it is a good idea and important for you to contact faculty that their research is of interest to you, because from day one, if accepted, you will start working with a faculty that their research matches your research interests. And I put my email up there if you have any questions about obtaining a PhD in education. Chris, did we record this session? We had a question from one of the members about obtaining the recording.
Elena, were you able to record it?
Yes, it is recording now.
Okay. I believe it will get reposted, hopefully, up on your website, so you will be able to access it there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, we will send you a link also.
Okay, wonderful. Any further questions that we can address?
There's a question about statements of purpose, about some particular research question or topics in general. So this is Dave here. In general, it is a very good idea to have your statement of purpose address very deeply the particular program and the particular potentially group that you want to work with. So if there are multiple research groups in the program you're applying to, you should be familiar with them. Your statement of purpose should be specific enough that it's clear which group or groups you'd be well aligned with. And it will just help you to sort of focus and make a coherent statement if you do that as well. If you just say, I'm really interested in psychology, the human mind is fascinating, that's not going to get as much purchase as if you specifically address it to the group or topic that you're really most passionate about, and that will come across in your essay.
Okay, any other questions that we can address for you? Okay, well, I hope you have our contact information. I think we all provided it, and also the website you see up there on the screen right now. You can use that to find out more about Drexel University's programs. It was our honor and pleasure to talk with you today. Hopefully, we'll see your applications somewhere down the road. Be sure to mention that if you do apply, that it was through Education USA that you heard about us or did talk to us. It's always good to know that we're reaching people through this. Again, if you think of any questions later on, this webinar will be reposted on the Education USA website, but you can always reach out to us with any questions down the road. So thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you for very informative session.
Thank you, Elena, for hosting. We appreciate it.